All right, class, welcome. Today we're going to do the chapter 2 of Adobe After Effects CS6 Classroom in a Book using Adobe CC 2017. Just because this is a fine thing to learn. All right, this is the animation we're going to make, only we're going to make our own improvements to it once it's done. Okay, so we're going to blur in a logo, and we're going to wipe in some text, and we're going to do all that on top of this background. So let's go to After Effects. If you have your welcome screen, just click New Project. We'll make a new one now. And just for safety, the book always tells us to save our project before we start doing anything. The reason why this is good practice is if you are working along and you haven't saved your project, if After Effects crashes or your power goes out or your computer goes down, After Effects will not have done any auto-saving on that project. Every 15 minutes or so, After Effects will do an auto-save, but it only does that after you've saved it for the first time. So that's why the book always says save right away. So I'm going to just call this my name. Oh my gosh. Chapter 2. Now, the book also, in the lesson folders, it provides you with an end project file, which is the one that you can basically just check your work against. So that's the finished project file. And then this, that's the end one right there. This finished project folder is there so that you can save yours as you work along. And then the sample movie is the exported file at the end. Just an example of what it should look like when it's done. I swear all of my, like half of my lectures in this class have me sounding like I'm sick. I got sick like right after class last week, so I'm recovering again. All right. First thing we need to do, you may have learned this from doing chapter 1, but there are several ways to get assets into After Effects, and that is to import. The different methods for importing are, I will go from worst to first. The worst way is to go up to this File menu and go find Import and then click File. But the reason why I did that is because this is how you learn the key commands. What is that right there? Command I. Command I for import. Okay? So now you should never have to go back to this menu when you want to import a file. Just remember Command I. Alright, so you have the key command, Command I, but there's a third way, actually a third and a fourth way. The third way I'm going to show you is to drag and drop. So if you go to your assets folder in the lesson folder, you can drag the Parthenon JPEG into the project panel in After Effects, and that'll import it. Okay, so there's method number 3. Method number 4 is if you have any negative space that you can see in the project panel here, double click in there and that'll open up your import asset dialog box. Okay, so it's the same 4 ways as Premiere does it. You can use the File menu, you can use Command I, you can drag and drop, or you can double click in the project panel. Alright, so I want the Parthenon JPEG first. Now, this Parthenon JPEG, now that it's highlighted in the project panel, underneath, up in this space right here, you can see a thumbnail, if a thumbnail is available, and you get some information about this. This 1600 by 1200, who wants to tell me what that is?
Image size?
Yep, that's the image size. That's the dimensions in pixels. So it's 1600 pixels by 1200 pixels. Now for this lesson, similar to Premiere, you could drag this JPEG into your timeline and it'll create a new timeline that is the exact dimensions of the picture. But based on what you know from the Premiere class, is 1600 by 1200 standard frame size? I'm seeing shaking heads. Yeah, the answer is no. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. But if you did have some footage, some video footage that you wanted to make sure your composition was the same size as your footage, you would drag the video clip into the timeline or down to this icon right here, which is the new composition icon. And then once you let go, that'll create a new composition and load it in your timeline. Okay? So I'm going to hit Command Z again just to undo that. I am going to click on the new composition, or the key command is Command N for new. Command N will do it also. Alright, this will bring up a composition settings dialog box. This is a good time to name it. I'm just going to name this Parthenon animation. And under this preset drop down, I'm going to create this NTSC D1. Okay, what that is NTSC digital video. Actually, no, I'm going to do this NTSC DV, digital video. Okay, so if I click on that, then you'll see this 720 by 480, which is standard definition video, which is going away. And we see this D1 DV NTSC, that's the pixel aspect ratio. Because if we remember from our video editing, 720 by 480 can be either widescreen or standard definition based on the aspect ratio of the pixels that make up the picture. So they're either wide pixels that'll stretch it to widescreen, or they're skinny pixels to make it slightly skinnier for that 4:3 screen. So next up is our frame rate. That's fine because we're just doing this preset. The only other thing we might need to worry about is this duration. This duration is, if you remember how to read time code, going from right to left, the first two numbers are frames. Okay, so that's the division of the second. And because we're dealing with 2997, that's essentially 30 frames will go in a second. And then the next two, that's how many seconds long. So the maximum number of seconds, the maximum number you can have as these second two would be 59, because once it goes up to 60, it would tick up to the next minute. And then the next two are hours. Okay? So hours, minutes, seconds, frames. For this one, here's how a really nice way that you can type in how long you want your composition to be. If I type a 1, and remember it kind of reads it, from right to left. So I want to say, if I want a 1 second long animation, I need to make sure I put 2 more zeros at the end of that to make it 1 second. See, if I click outside, then it'll fill all the rest of those numbers in and make it 1 second long. If I want it to be 10 seconds, I'll type a 10, and then I'll put another 00, and that'll be 10 seconds. And you can see this little number off to the side, it's ticking up as I go. So if I want it to be 1 minute, I go 1, and then 00, and then another 00, and that'll make it 1 minute. Well, 59 seconds, 28 frames. But that's a minute. The end of that last frame will be 1 minute exactly. So this animation only needs to be 10 seconds long. So I'm going to type in 1000, and I'm going to click OK. And there we have our composition. Now let's take a look at our views here. This is our composition window where this black rectangle is. Let me come down here and just show you a couple of these. These are different rendering options as far as if you have a really complicated project, these two views will help you manage taking a look at more than one at a time. this is your zoom. So right now, this says at fit up to 100%. So with this 100% in parentheses, that's saying that this is fitting up to 100%, which means this is full-size view right here on my screen. So I can actually drop that down to smaller, like 50%. The other way to zoom in on that is I could scroll up or scroll down to make it bigger or smaller in that window. Or I can hit Command minus or plus next to the delete key at the top right hand corner of your QWERTY keyboard. Okay? So Command plus or minus will make that smaller or bigger. Roller on your mouse, or the least efficient way would be to do it here. Okay? Alright, the next thing, this little crosshairs right here, if you click on this, you can open up a grid so you can kind of see little areas. So if you want to like find exact measurements on your screen, that grid will show that. You can show rulers, which will allow you to put your own guides in, you know, so you can do that just like in Photoshop and Illustrator. Command R will also bring up the rulers and hide the rulers. Title Action Safe. Remember how I harped on Action Safe and Title Safe so much last semester? We're going to be making lots of titles in After Effects, so we want to make sure that those bars are always there so we can make sure we're not going inside. With widescreen, like HD compositions, there's an additional set of lines on the inside for making sure that your titles are within center crop safe. So, and what center crop safe is like if you take HD video and you broadcast it without letterboxing it on a standard definition TV, it cuts the sides off. So if you have any titles outside of that area, then you're running into double problems because nobody will see it if they're still using a standard definition television. Alright, so next view. Let's turn off the title action safe. This thing, if you turn this on and off, we don't have any objects in our composition yet, but if we did, that would put the binding box around your objects or not, so that you can grab them and move them around. This is the time code. This will take a snapshot of your screen. This is some different color options for viewing. We'll get into that another time. Next thing I want to go into is this one. If we're doing really heavy effects and we have this at full, then every single time we move an object around, it'll try to generate a full resolution image, which if we're dealing with big images and a lot of layers, it can slow down your working process. So sometimes it might be good to drop the resolution down so that you can work faster. And if you just leave it at auto, then it'll try to do it based on the size here. You can do a region of interest. This is if you're really cooking. You can draw this region of interest, and then the only thing it'll update is within there. So if you have this big animation happening, but you're only working on a little teeny part of the frame, and you want to just make sure that's looking right, rather than regenerating an image for the entire view, it'll just render what's inside this box. This is your transparency grid. Right now we don't have anything in our comp, which means if we rendered this out with alpha channel, it would just be invisible. There'd be an invisible video. It'd be nothing. This is for 3D stuff. We'll get into this later. This is for 3D stuff. We'll get into this later. This little thing is our aspect ratio correction. So if I click it on, it will take that 720 by 480 and it'll squish it into its 4:3 aspect ratio. If it were widescreen, if it's off, the widescreen would look like this, but then if we clicked it on, the edges would pop out if we had the widescreen aspect ratio for those pixels. We're only actually going to deal with non-square pixels a handful of times because HD video is square pixels. Okay, so it's only when you're dealing with standard definition, and I hate that I have to even teach it to you. All right, so let's bring this Parthenon JPEG down into our comp. If we drag that down right into this area, it'll add the layer right at the beginning of the timeline. Some other ways to drag that down is if I drag it down into the timeline area here, it'll drop it where I let go of my mouse. Okay, so if I have an animation happening, and if there were multiple layers, it would drop it in the stacking order that I dropped it as well. Okay, so that's a good thing to know.
It's giving me a circle with the thing that when we drag it and put it in there.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, never mind. I figured it out.
Okay, never mind. Sorry for the pause there, everybody. Just watch it at 2x. Just kidding. All right. Okay, so this image at 1600 by 1200 is much bigger than 720 by 480. So what we need to do now is scale this so that it'll match either the width or the height. And I said last week that as we are navigating around, there are a lot of options that are available if you right-click on the layer itself. And in this situation, we have transform, and we can fit to comp height or width. In this situation, I'm going to do it to width. And the key command is Alt-Shift-Command-H. Believe it or not, I have that one memorized because I use it a lot. Okay, so what that does is it scales down the image in a uniform fashion so that the sides match up with the composition size. Question?
How would you know, like, why width, why not the height?
Well, in this situation, I knew that it was going to be slightly taller. If I did height, then the sides would come in too much, and I would have black on the sides when I render it out. So that's why I did width instead of height. Yeah, width instead of height. I did width. Good question. All right. Next thing we need to do, let's import our Illustrator file. So I'm going to double click over here because I can, and I'm going to import this destinations logo.ai. Now when I click open, I'm going to get another dialog box. When you import Illustrator files and Photoshop files, if there are multiple layers within the Illustrator or Photoshop file, you're going to get this option of whether or not to import it as footage or as a composition. If you import it as footage, no matter how complex the Photoshop file or Illustrator file is, it'll come in as one flat image. Okay, there's nothing you can do with it after that. It's just like importing a picture. But if we import it as a composition, it will retain all of the layers and allow you to grab any layer and move it around the screen. So if you've got this really complex Photoshop file with mountains and clouds and all these different renderings, then you can animate the clouds moving behind the mountains if you import it as a composition. So we're going to do that. One thing that I usually do is import these as layer size. Now what the layer size does, let me do this both ways just so you can see. Let's do layer size first. Click OK. Now there's my destinations logo. It's as a composition. And below it, it imported a folder called destinations logo layers. And if I twirl that folder down, there are three objects. There's this text, there's this globe, and there's something smaller that I can't see in the thumbnail view. If I double click on the destinations logo composition, then it'll bring that up into the timeline, and I can see what looks like the full image, but then I've got these 3 layers, and as I click on them, see, that's nothing. That's nothing. The crop area, it's nothing. If I look at globe logo, see that binding box? See how big it is? It's the same size as this graphic. Same thing with the rotated type. The binding box that comes over it is the size of the type. Alright, so let me just delete those things out of there and re-import the destinations logo.ai as a composition, but in this one we're going to make it document size. Click OK. Now in this situation, if I click on the rotated type, see how big that binding box is now? The binding box is the same size as the entire Illustrator file. Which is correct? Both are correct. It just depends on what you're going to be doing with it, with the footage. Okay, so there are some effects that are a lot easier to work with when you have the layer be the entire size of the comp. And there are other effects where, see, if I try to rotate the earth, watch what happens. It rotates around the entire document size. Whereas before, the binding box was right around the earth, and if I were to rotate it, the earth itself would just rotate. Okay. Now, the book doesn't tell you to do this. The book tells you to do it this way, but I'm going to do it the other way because I do want to rotate the earth, which is not something the book tells you to do. All right. So I'm going to delete that again. I'm going to re-import it. This time I'm going to import it as layer size and then click OK. All right. So let's do some stuff with these 2 objects. Let me pause for just a second. All right, next up what we're going to do is make a text layer. You did it in chapter 1, but I'll just kind of go through it again. The key command to activate your type tool is Command T. Even though most of the time in other programs that is what makes you activate your transform box. Well, After Effects is always in transform mode, so Command T is to activate the type tool. Plus, we'll go over what T does in just a second. So if I hit Command T, then I activate my type tool. Just for reference, the type tool is right here in your toolbox. So if I do a single click on my composition window, then that activates a new type layer down here. And then I can start typing. And here it's Travel Europe. And then a hard return will allow you to start typing another line on the same layer. The soft return will deactivate the editing of type for that layer so that you can either do another click to add another type layer or hit V to reactivate your selection tool, and then we can grab it and move it around. Okay. I am going to, let's go over and talk about the character panel. This is like all the other Adobe programs where you can select font. I'm going to just do a non-serif one. Let's put it back to Helvetica. It's like almost a universal font anymore. And then you can change the size of it by scrubbing over the text size or clicking on it and using your up and down arrows to change the size of it. Holding down Shift will change it faster. Or you can say I want that to be 40, and then you select that number and you type in 40. And then another return will deactivate that, and then you can go back to editing it. You've got leading and kerning. You've got skewing, you've got baseline shift, you've got vertical and horizontal skew, you've got changing the space in between the text, all that stuff is right here. And then you can do your faux bold, your faux italic, all caps. In this case, I am going to do all caps. And that turns it like that. Now here's a nice little tip for selecting the color. You can either click on this nice box right here and try to get a color that will match that green. That was pretty close. Let's see how close I was. Or you can use the color picker. Now I'm going to use my scroll. Here's a little thing about navigating. Anytime you want to turn any tool into the hand tool, hold down the space bar. Don't tap the space bar, hold it down, and that turns it into the hand tool. And I can click that and drag it over like that. Question?
Yes. What is the soft? How do you do the soft return to close it?
It's the soft return is the enter key over by your number pad. If you're on a MacBook Pro, it's function enter. That's your soft return. All right. So now, instead of trying to find a color that's pretty close, I think I actually did get pretty close. You can go to the color picker and pick a pixel that is the same color. Oh, it was so close. It was a little bit lighter. All right. So I just scrolled out again, hold down spacebar to turn it into the hand tool, and then I can center it up on there. Okay. All right, so let's add a text animator to this. There are a couple ways to do that. For now, because of this chapter, I'm going to go to my window because it's not open right now, and I'm going to activate my effects and presets panel. And in my effects and presets panel, I'm going to type in bullet because there's a text preset called bullet train. Now, if I double click on bullet train with the text layer selected in my timeline panel, if I double click on bullet train, it'll add this bullet train animator effect to this text. But I don't want it to happen right at the beginning. I want it to happen a few seconds in. So if I move my playhead up to 3 seconds, another way to do that would be to type in, single click right here in the time code and type 300, and that'll put my playhead at 3 seconds. Then, if I double click on bullet train, it'll add this cool little animation to the text. A little blurring effect. Now by default, that is half a second long. Okay. So what that did was that added some animation keyframes to the text layer. Now, the way you uncover those keyframes so you can look at them is the letter U. U for uncover. And those little diamonds, this diamond says text is invisible, and this diamond says text is all the way on. So if I push spacebar from here, as this playhead goes over, it'll animate that text on. Watch. Shring. So fancy. All right, now let's do an animation of the... all right, one more thing before I do that. If you want to slow the animation down, all you have to do is increase the distance between these two diamonds. And I can do that by dragging either the first one earlier or the second one later or a little bit of both. And now it's 1.5 seconds long. Travel Europe. All right. Now the next thing I want to do is do this little trick called pre-composing. I want to add an effect to the destinations layer and this planet layer. And this crop area layer is nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. So select the crop area, delete it. And now I want to select the rotated type and the globe logo. And here's where it is in the composition menu. Composition. I don't even remember where it is now. I've done this with the key commands so many times. Pre-compose. It's in layer. Pre-compose. So there's the key command. Command-Shift-C. My fingers are always there ready to do it. Command-Shift-C. So there it is. If you do the pre-compose command with these two layers selected, then you can say, I want to make this globe pre-comp, and it'll move all the attributes into this new composition. Click OK. And what that did was it created a new composition in my project, but it turned both of those layers, the destinations text and the globe, into one layer. Okay? I'm going to hit Command-Z. But if I double click on that layer, it will open up the globe pre-comp in its own tab, and now we have the separated globe. So if I move this globe here and go back to the destinations logo, it then updated the position. So any animation I do in here, in this globe pre-comp, will show up in here, in the destinations logo. So I'm going to undo that. What I want to do is, actually before I do that, let's go to the destinations logo tab, and let's add an effect to the destinations logo. And I'm going to add a fast blur. So if I go back to my effects and presets panel here and type in fast, there's the blur. There's the fast blur effect. Now, last time I double clicked on an effect to put it on the layer. This time I'm going to drag the effect and place it on the layer, just to show you a second way to put an effect on a layer. Now, what that did was it automatically loaded that effect into my effects controls panel, which is up in the same space as my project panel. So if I make this a little bit smaller and go back and forth between project and effects controls, there's my project assets, and here's where I control the effects. Now under blurriness, if I click on this and drag it up, it makes it like super blurry, right? So that's what I want to do. I see this effect that I'm doing with my hand right now, super blurry, and then as I drag it down here, it materializes. I want to do that, but I want to animate it. So what I need to do is turn on the keyframes for the blurriness parameter. So if I click on the stopwatch, that will add a keyframe right where my playhead is for the blurriness. Now, does anybody remember how I can uncover that keyframe? You. That is correct. Now again, I put that keyframe almost right at the beginning of my animation. So, but I want it to be clear. I want it to start blurry and then become clear. Right now it's clear and it's at the beginning, and so I don't have anywhere for it to start. Anybody want to venture a guess as to what I need to do?
Turn off your keyframe, make it all blurry, and then put your keyframe on.
Okay,
And then go the other way.
that would work. That would absolutely work. Let's do it a more efficient way. Since I already have a keyframe here, and it's not blurry, I'm just going to grab this keyframe and put it later. Okay, so I can drag it right and left, so I just made it later. Now, if I go to the blurriness, see this blurriness keyframe? This value right here is the same as this value. So there are now two places I can change the blurriness. I can either do it up in my effects controls panel, or I can do it down here in my timeline panel. Just to show you, I'm going to do it in my timeline panel. So if I turn up the blurriness, till it's pretty much disappeared, it automatically adds a keyframe because keyframes are already active for that property. Now as if I move my playhead along, I have coinciding blurry animation going along with this Travel Europe. And the reason why those animations are overlapping each other in time is because these keyframes are on top of each other. So the animations are happening in staggered time one to another. Okay? So let's do one last thing. This is something the book isn't going to teach you for a while, but I want to do it because it's going to look better. I want to add this I want to make this destinations thing as it's blurring in. I want to have the destinations text like rotate around the planet, revolve around the planet. So let's go into our little animation, our pre-comp, and take a look at the destinations and the planet. We're going to do what's called a parent-child relationship. I'm going to duplicate this globe logo, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to hit Command D for duplicate. Okay, so now I've got this globe logo 2 layer. And if you take a look at the layers, to the left of the layers, we have our eyeballs, which will turn visibility on and off, just like Photoshop and Illustrator. But we also have solo layers. So if I click on the type layer with this solo dot, it'll hide everything else and only show the destinations type. Okay, so same thing with this globe, same thing with this globe. Now, I'm going to hide globe logo number 2. And the reason for that is I'm going to rotate globe logo number 2. But the planet rotates on its axis, which is vertical right now. We don't have a 3D planet, so all I want it to do is have this text kind of circle around the globe. Now, what I'm going to do is select the rotated type layer, and under this parent menu, if I grab this little squiggly pick whip tool and I drag it and I go whoop, psh, it's now going to follow every move that globe logo 2 does. And in this situation, because it's the same as globe logo, if I hit R for rotation, I can now rotate that text around it. Dun, da, da, da. So if I turn on globe logo 2, watch what globe logo 2 is doing. It's rotating, but the destinations text is following it. So if I turn that layer off and then rotate the layer, then it just looks like the destination stuff is going around it. Pretty cool, eh? Hoser? All right. Rotated type of, okay, so now what we need to do is check this out. I want to see, no, that's getting a little bit complicated for you. Let's just add rotation keyframes to globe logo 2. So I hit R, and that brings up my rotation property. If I select the stopwatch, that'll add a keyframe here. And I know this is about where I want it, okay? So I'm going to put it at 5 seconds. Just put it right there, 5 seconds. Now I'm going to move my playhead back to 2 seconds, and I'm going to do a negative rotation value on that, so it'll rotate backward. Now watch what happens. In between these 2 keyframes, bam, hits its spot right there. All right, there was a question. Jess?
So you linked it to the globe 2 because if you hadn't, it wouldn't rotate around the globe the right way, right?
Well, if I had just parented it to globe logo without making a duplicate of the globe logo first, and then rotated globe logo, then the Earth would rotate in an unnatural direction. So I'm just kind of, another way I could do this, because of the way visibility works in After Effects, if globe logo if I leave globe logo visible, if I stack it on the bottom, because I've already set up this parent-child relationship, no matter where globe logo 2 goes, destinations will follow. Okay? It's visible now, but we can't see it because it's hidden behind. Well, actually, we can see part of it right here. Yeah. But, yeah. The way that parent-child relationship works, though, is I could move it around. And destinations is just going to go wherever. I can scale it in any way. It kind of makes destinations part of that same layer, even though it's separate. I can still grab destinations and move it, but it's still, no matter where it goes, it's going to rotate around the parent. Okay? So there's a lot of crazy stuff you can do with parents and children. Ha ha ha. All right. So I'm going to turn globe logo off. Make sure that that's moving the way I want it to. Okay, good. Now, I want to go back to this destinations logo and watch the timing of the text rotating in. And what I really wanted was for the destinations to be finished rotating once the blur, pretty much the same time as the blur getting done materializing. So with the playhead on this keyframe, if I double click on this again, that shows me where that is. Okay, so now if I drag these two keyframes over so that that meets up right there, then when I go back to destinations logo, the destinations text will finish rotating as it becomes not blurry. I'm going to move it to right here though, because I couldn't even see it. Right here. So the way I'm selecting both of these keyframes is you can just drag a box and select both of them. Question?
How would you make it so that the destination starts and stops smoothly instead of abruptly?
Okay, so the question is, how would I make this destination start and stop smoothly and not slamming into place like that? I'm really glad you asked that because I was probably going to do that next anyway. What you need to do is add easing to this keyframe. With your mouse, the easiest way to add a keyframe is to right-click on the keyframe, which gives you this little menu, and then you go to Keyframe Assistant and then go Easy Ease In or Easy Ease. In, out, and Easy Ease. Easy Ease will add easing to both in and out simultaneously. Easy Ease In will add it so that as you approach going into the keyframe, it'll slow down before stopping. And that's how you do it. We'll get into a lot more how you control that. You can make it slow down a whole bunch before it stops.
You do it all the time.
Yeah, the command with your mouse is to right click on the keyframe, go to the Keyframe Assistant, and then select the Easy Ease is the most safe way because then you just make sure you get it both sides and you don't have to know whether it's in or out if you want to be lazy with your brain. All right.
And we always do.
You always want, yeah, the lazier we can be, like, yeah, the best engineers are the lazy ones because they figure out the most lazy way to do stuff. Okay. Now, we have this Travel Europe animation happening. Let's put this on our Parthenon animation. So if I go over to the Parthenon animation tab, go up to my project tab, and then grab this destination logo asset and drag it down on top of the Parthenon JPEG. The stacking order is important. If I were to drag it down below, then we would never see it because the JPEG would be covering it. All right? So this is what I meant by the invisible. If we go to the destinations logo animation and click on this, anything that we see that's this checker board, this grid in in the background, that's invisible. So if we put it on top of something else, that part becomes see-through. Okay, so anything that has that checkerboard, if I turn it on here, the Parthenon background is covering everything. Okay. Now let's add another effect to this Travel Europe destinations, everything. Let's go over to our effects and presets and type in drop, and that'll give us our drop shadow. Let's drag that down, and then as soon as we drop it on there, it opens up our drop shadow preferences. Let's change the opacity to 25. Let's leave the direction where it is. Let's leave the distance where it is, but let's make it soft. And I'm going to click on it and then just use my up arrow until it looks as soft as I want it to be. Let's do 10. That made it pretty soft, so maybe I'll go back up and change this to 40% opacity. There, that looks all right. All right, last thing. Let me hit the home key. I'm going to hit spacebar to preview this. See if I like it. And I do. Okay, so this animation is 10 seconds long, right? Well, before we are done, at maybe 7 seconds, or let's do 8 seconds. At 8 seconds, I want the Travel Europe graphic to fade back off the screen. And the way you would simulate a cross dissolve is to use the opacity settings. Now, P for position, R for rotation, S for scale, A for anchor point. What do you think the opacity settings would be?
Oh.
You would think, but it's actually T. T for transparency. That's how I remember it. So T will bring up our opacity settings. So just think about opacity as transparency. So if I click the stopwatch there, and then, so right now I'm at 7 seconds, 29 frames, which is really 8 seconds. If I type in 900, that'll put my playhead at 9 seconds. And then if I go to my opacity settings, click on this, type in 0, hit enter, that'll make it fade away in between those two keyframes. Okay? That's the same thing as a 1 second cross dissolve. Just dissolves away. And that, I believe, is everything minus like 2 things for that chapter. It's all the important stuff. So there you go. There's one other effect they add to it, but I don't think it's really necessary to go over it and spend another 5 minutes. So there's our Chapter 2 tutorial recorded in online video form for your viewing reference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.